Welcome to the Dignity of Work Tour. I am so excited to be here in Las Vegas. My name is Erica Washington. I am the Executive Director of Make It Work Nevada, Make It Work Nevada Education Fund. And I am really excited to have an opportunity to talk about issues that matter to my community here in Las Vegas. I've spent a lot of time working, but even more so than working, I'm a mother of 3 young daughters, and thinking about what I want for them in their life and what I want for them in their future. I want for them to have equal pay. I want them to be able to take time off when they are sick. I want them to be able to take care of me when I am old. And so, in able to do that, we have to be able to talk about the issues. So I'm really excited to have Senator Brown here from Ohio to talk to us about issues that matter, and for us to be able to talk to him about the issues that matter here in Las Vegas, Nevada. So I'm really excited that you're here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Washington, for having us.
For gracing us with your presence here.
Welcome, my wife, Connie Schultz.
Hello, Connie. Thank you so much for also coming.
And Connie is a writer, as many of you know, and has written extensively about women's issues and labor issues and dignity of work and all the values that I think, as we went around the room before the camera was on, all the values that I think most of you share of work and healthcare and rights for the disabled and all that you talked about. So thank you for letting me be part of it.
We are really excited for you to be here. And I will say, as a side note, I did know who your wife was before I knew who you were. As a former journalist, I am a big fan.
I can't count the number of people that we just came from Henderson, and really all over they say, Senator, I like you, but I love your wife. So, and I can live with that. So there are way worse things in this world than that, Ms. Washington. So thank you.
It's very true. So I think we're just going to open it up to questions right away.
Good, sure.
And I'm actually going to pass my mic on over to Irma.
Okay.
Hi, Irma. Thank you for being here, Senator.
Good to be here.
One of my main concerns here is home care. I really want to see the improvement of home care for our community. We have a lot of people that are very concerned about so many things going on, that about a lot of things cutting back, and then they're concerned because of their prescriptions, are their hours cutting back, and so forth. Anything that has to do with medical issues. Okay, that's my main concern.
Okay. Should I take the microphone and talk, or let's just go around? How do you want to do this?
Anybody?
Okay.
Thank you.
Go for it.
Ask my question?
Yes.
All right, so my name is Jasmine, and my question for you.
You have to introduce your daughter to people.
This is Jalen. Can you say your name? Okay. So my question for you is, what would you do to help modify our childcare prices when the price of childcare is many times more than college in our society, in America right now?
Shall I respond,
yes.
or shall I? Okay, so thank you for both questions, and I think they're related. We've had a government, we have a president and a government now that really are attacking healthcare. They're attacking Medicare, they're attacking Medicaid. A bunch of members of Congress that have good health insurance themselves tried to take it away from. I mean, this is a state that's done Medicaid generally right, and makes it available to people. But you know, we haven't seen government do nearly enough about prescription drug prices. One of the things we should do is, there's no reason that when drug companies advertise, they should be able to deduct the cost of their advertising. Basically, it's taxpayers subsidizing the drug company's sales. We ought to have the government negotiate drug prices directly with the drug companies, the way that the VA does. The VA in Las Vegas, veterans pay, the VA pays probably 40 or 50% less for their drugs than you do as individuals, whether you're uninsured or insured. That makes no sense. And with child care, we need to start thinking about child care as a public good. We invest in parks, we invest in transportation. Our society ought to invest in child care in the sense that, I mean, I want your daughter and other children to have a nurturing have a nurturing environment when you go to work or when you have something you have to do and you leave your child in childcare. And we need to do that by investing as a society, investing in children. It will pay off in a healthier, stronger, smarter, better educated, better adjusted child to have that kind of nurturing environment. And we don't put the emphasis, the president in this country doesn't put the emphasis, and our government don't put the emphasis on investing in children the way we should, whether it's preschool or whether it's child care prior to preschool, or whether it's public education generally. Thanks.
Hello, Senator Brown, and welcome to Vegas Valley, and Connie. I am a small business owner, have a landscape business, and I have seen in the last 2 years an increase in my health premiums. My copay went up last year, and to see a specialist went up, and then this year I've seen a $100 increase in my monthly premium. So I know that I've heard about 2 different platforms. I'm hoping you're going to talk about the ACA and what you guys are doing to protect us, because it's getting chiseled away. But I've heard about the single payer system and the expansion of Medicaid, which I understand you've written a bill on. And I was wondering, what is your platform and why is that?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for what you said about the Affordable Care Act. As a government, we should be helping people quickly, and the best way to do that is to, I would say, 2 or 3 things. We expand Medicare to 50 so that someone 53 or 58 years old can choose to buy into Medicare if that would be better insurance than they now have, if they're uninsured or if they just have an insurance policy that's not very good. Second, we should pass a law, which I worked on this 10 years ago, and we couldn't get it in the Affordable Care Act then, Obamacare then, to set up a public option so that people of any age have the opportunity to join a public plan that competes with insurance plans. That would mean the public plan would not have the overhead of insurance. It would be the way Medicare does it, with very little overhead. It also would compete with insurance, forcing insurance rates down. We also need to, as you suggested, fix the Affordable Care Act, where the Trump administration has attacked it in its marketing and its in the navigators that are trying to figure people. Most people don't know how to get on Obamacare. They don't know how to do it, and we had help for them before. And fundamentally, you don't. Some people in Washington want to repeal Obamacare. We keep it. We build on it. And then one last thing, we build protections in for pre-existing conditions, so that if you get sick, if you're sick, the government or the insurance company decides they don't want to insure you because you might cost too much, or they cut your insurance off if you've gotten too sick and been too expensive. So we need to build the consumer protections and then expand health care that way.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good questions.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
First of all, Senator, I'd just like to thank both you and your wife for making it here tonight.
Of course.
What I would like to know is, what do you think about the minimum wage? Should it be raised? And if so, what should the new minimum wage be?
It should be raised. The last time it was raised in Washington was 2007. It should be raised to $15. It's an understanding in some communities $15 you can't get by on, but we need to be bold. We need to go to that amount. We also, though, need to fix. I won't go into great detail here, but there was something that Secretary Perez, the Secretary of Labor, and I did with President Obama 3 years ago to expand overtime protection. So if you're making $30,000 a year and you're working at a fast food restaurant, and say you're managing the night shift, and McDonald's or the fast food restaurant says, okay, you are management now because you're managing, they can make you work 50 hours, 60 hours and not pay you a cent of overtime. We fixed that so anybody making up to $50,000 a year couldn't be forced by their company to work more. This is for big companies. Small businesses are exempt from this. But they couldn't force you to work 50 or 60 hours without overtime pay. When we did that, it was 5 million Americans got a raise. I mean, thousands of Nevadans got a raise, yet Trump took it away. So we need to build on the minimum wage, the overtime rule. And at the same time, we do things like the child tax credit and child in some of the investment in child care too. I mean, that should be part of the whole package. Thanks for asking. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator.
Thanks.
You're right. My question also is about minimum wage. You've answered Javier's question, and you are for raising the minimum wage. How do you think that's going to impact the overall workforce, and as far as the finances look on that?
Well, this old theory comes out of Washington every time there's a president like Trump or Bush that if you give tax cuts to rich people, then it'll trickle down and everybody will get raises. And I mean, I heard President Trump sitting no further than I'm sitting across here from Javier. I mean, literally that close. I heard him say that if you pass my tax law, every American will get a $4,000 raise. Well, nobody's seen that, and they haven't seen a cut in their taxes. I mean, I just don't buy this. You cut tax on rich people, it trickles down. The way you grow the economy is you focus on the middle. You focus on working families, people making 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 and 60,000 a year. You focus on them. You do tax credits and tax cuts for them, and they grow the economy. Why? Because they're going to spend the money. I don't think if you get a raise, if you're a culinary worker and you're making $20 an hour and you get a $2 an hour raise, I don't think you're going to probably put it in a Swiss bank account. You're probably going to spend it in Las Vegas or spend it in Reno or spend it in Elko or spend it in Carson or wherever you live or in Henderson. And so that's the way to grow the economy. And it's just this myth that the far right and a bunch of the same kind of myth when I hear in Javier's question, and I know my wife's looking at me because I gave too long an answer here. But when you raise the minimum wage, I hear right wingers say, well, that's going to raise prices and that's going to cause layoffs. But they never say that when an executive gets $1 million raise. They never say that's going to cause layoffs, that's going to cause higher prices. So I just don't buy their economics. So we raise the minimum wage. It will make for a more prosperous country.
Hi, I'm Chandra, and I have a question. So earlier you spoke about Medicare, expanding Medicare, and allowing people at 50 years to be able to buy in. Mm-hmm. And so to me, that's addressing the issue of people who don't have insurance at all. Mm-hmm. I'd like to talk about people who do have insurance, mm-hmm. but that appears to be insufficient. I have a sister who just experienced a horrible situation yesterday where she had a cyst burst in her uterus, in her ovary, pardon me. And she sat in her car for an hour yesterday in excruciating pain, trying to decide whether she would use her insurance, knowing that she was going to have over a $4,000 liability, or whether she would get herself home somehow and maybe go to urgent care. And my sister has a great job. She works for a Fortune 500 insurance company. And even if she took their very best insurance policy, which is 6 times what she currently pays, it would only have reduced her yearly deductible to $2,700. And as you know, we've had stories all over that say, you know, most Americans don't have lots of money in savings, and she's been putting her money in her 401k, trying to prepare for her elder years, and not buying the high-end insurance, which would still have left her with quite a financial debt. How do we deal with those types of things?
I'm sorry about your sister, and I hope she's doing okay. So have you seen her? Was this here?
She's actually in Northern California, but I'm a union steward. Okay. I've heard similar things.
You hear these stories all the time.
Same thing here in Las Vegas.
And you're 226 union steward or another union?
I'm in 1107 SCIU.
Oh, you're SCIU. Okay. That's part of county government?
I'm with an organization, yes, a local governmental organization.
I mean, healthcare in this country costs too much, period. And it costs too much partly because of the power of insurance companies lobbying Congress. It costs too much because we allow drug companies to overcharge consistently. Drugs, when I was a member of Congress, I used to, we lived in northern Ohio, and I used to every few months we would take my we would pay for a bus, and we'd take people to Canada about 2.5 hours away, and they could buy prescription drugs. They had a doctor's prescription, and they'd go to a Canadian pharmacy, and it cost sometimes 50% less, sometimes 60 or 70% less. So we have allowed these private interests to game the system far too much. That's only a partial answer. I think another answer is to have, if we allow people to, I know you said for people that already have insurance, but if we would allow your sister to decide, well, Medicare, buying into Medicare or the public option would work better than her insurance company, she'd make that decision. That'll do two things. One, it might actually work better and be cheaper for her. The other thing it would do is it would compete with insurance companies to bring their prices down. But we have to, this is a terrible problem in our country that so many people now that even have what they think is decent insurance, when something tragic happens like to your sister, their insurance is not as good as they think it is. And we just aren't really trying to get to the core of that. Thank you.
And my question is also about healthcare. We tend to talk a lot about cost and about insurance, but what we saw, especially with the Affordable Care Act, is that once we expanded insurance, there were not enough doctors to be able to take patients. And so we have a situation here in Nevada where there's some areas that don't have hospitals, and we also have areas where there just aren't enough doctors, specialists that we just don't have in the state. So what are your thoughts on actually expanding access to medical care outside of just insurance?
And thank you for that, Ms. Stevens. We also don't have doctors enough doctors in the places. Well, I mean, I guess it's common sense. We don't have doctors in the underserved areas where, we're more likely to have lots of doctors in San Francisco than we are rural areas or than we are inner city areas. I mean, doctors choose where they want to live and where they want to practice, as they should. But that's part of the solution. I worked on something a decade ago with Senator Kennedy, with Ted Kennedy. I was new in the Senate, and we had a loan forgiveness bill that said if you go into public service, you can get your student loans forgiven after 10 years. Well, the problem is it wasn't implemented very well, and Trump has basically sliced it off now, where people that, I mean, we have this terrible student debt problem. If you go to UNLV or if you go to a community college or if you want to do any kind of higher ed, you end up with student debt that means you can't buy a house, or you can't, sometimes you think you shouldn't have a child because you can't afford it, all that. So if we do a loan forgiveness program to get doctors and nurses and dental hygienists into underserved areas, or police officers or teachers or people that are serving, Teach for America, or serving in public service, working for the county, like you're saying, then we do loan forgiveness. It would kind of fix two problems. It would fix the problem in part of student debt, so that kids could get out from under their debt legitimately. It would also mean we could get people into underserved areas better. So it really is something we should restart. But thank you for that.
Hi, I'm Aisha Champagne. Senator Brown, what are your views on raising minimum wage in the fight for 15?
Yeah, as I said to Javier, I like, of course, I support the idea of minimum wage raised. It hasn't been raised. I believe I shouldn't say this number, but if it had just kept up with what it was in about 1980, it would be well over 15. So we just simply haven't kept up, because government raises it in this case, it's been 12 years. I mean, you raise it 12 years, you can't keep up, because you just can't raise it enough that people can kind of handle it, as the businesses and the communities. But so we should raise it to 15, and we should have a cost of living adjustment once it's been raised to 15. Maybe it phases in over a couple of years. And I mean, you had said you have a small business. I've worked on a bill that we call our corporate freeloader bill, and it simply says this: if it's a big company, its executives are paid millions of dollars, and its workers are so low paid, $10, $12 an hour, that a lot of the workers are eligible for food stamps and Medicaid and housing vouchers and earned income tax credit, that those companies, these are big companies that have wealthy, very well paid executives but are paying low wages, that those companies ought to pay the government back, pay a corporate freeloader fee for the government, because taxpayers are subsidizing their workers. So that's part of this minimum wage question. We raise it to 15. We all say to these companies that are not supporting their workers the way they should, you've got to pay a fee to taxpayers to make up for it. Okay. Are you back again?
I am.
All right.
Okay. I also am a small business owner, and one of my concerns is health care. So there's been a lot of emphasis on the Affordable Care Act for individuals that have issues that are pre-existing. But as a small business owner, it is not affordable for me to have health care. So oftentimes I'm questioning, do I pay this bill or do I pay my insurance? So how do you see the health care stretching out to add as a boost or a help to those small business owners that are having an issue having insurance on the Affordable Health Care Act?
Yeah, I think you work that into this, that so many small companies are just as stretched as individual patients or taxpayers or whatever. And I mean, the Affordable Care Act is supposed to, we're back to her question about the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act it was designed in part to give subsidies to small businesses and individuals who simply aren't wealthy enough, don't make enough to be able to pay for insurance. So we want people to go into these exchanges. I mean, Connie and I are in the exchanges with millions of other Americans, and that people should be able to go to these exchanges. But if they are modest or low income, they ought to get bigger subsidies from the government. And there's no reason that shouldn't apply to small business. But we've seen since Trump, well, really since we passed the Affordable Care Act, some people in Congress have been attacking it, and Trump has attacked it. And it makes it hard to make it work as well as it should work to help those small businesses and individuals.
Did you? Oh, hi. I have another question. Or actually, it's a comment and a question.
Okay.
During the Kavanaugh hearings, we had visitors from ICE. They were here in our community for a week. During this time, what's the word I want to use? They stopped over 106 immigrants here in our community, and they were arrested. We have a large community here of dreamers and immigrants that are working very hard in this community, solid citizens. I just happen to know one who was picked up for looking brown, and excuse the pun, but was stopped for looking brown and detained, but a stellar citizen, so he's home now with his family. But we really have not given much care at all to immigration, to the 11 million that are here today, to the million dreamers that are here. What are your feelings about immigration?
Well, first of all,
you guys have a Salvadorian son-in-law.
Yeah.
We do. Story, yeah. And our oldest daughter is an immigration lawyer.
Oh, is she?
Yes.
And she's been to the border, and she's counseled families on how to what's the term that you use? To show those families that need to show that their lives have been threatened. That's why they want to come into the United States. Yeah, credible risk. To me, one of the most shameful things our country's ever done is what's happened at the border with these families now. I mean, I can't imagine a little girl your daughter's age, our granddaughter. We have 6 grandkids under 6. It's unimaginable to think of separation from them, from their parents or from their grandparents. And so, I mean, you start with that. But I met a young woman in Toledo maybe 6 months ago, and she's in early mid-20s. She came from Guatemala. She moved here when she was 4 with her parents. She speaks Spanish at home, but she doesn't know Guatemala. She knows Toledo. That's where she's lived since she was 4. And she's married. She's a dreamer, like Javier. She has a 1-year-old child. They have 1 car. They each work. She drops her husband off and goes to her work, then picks him up on the way home. And she said every morning before we go to work, either my husband or I goes out and checks the turn signals and the blinkers and the brake lights. And when I stop at a stop sign, I count to 3. And those of you who are African American here know that with your own kids or your brothers, or maybe you with your parents when they told you that. And I just don't want our country to be that. And I think it starts with a path to citizenship. I mean, it's deeper than that. It starts with wrongful incarceration. It starts with drug laws. It starts with the First Step Act, which is starts with ban the box. All the things that we need to do on housing discrimination and job discrimination and racial discrimination generally. But a path to citizenship and taking care of the dreamers is a big part of that. Thanks for raising that.
Thank you so much, Senator Brown and Connie, for being here. And Pam's question actually leads up to mine. The immigration community does mean a lot to me, communities of color. But talking about more specifically healthcare and Medicaid, how are we going to be expanding that to our undocumented communities?
I'm sorry, expand it to?
Undocumented.
Oh, to undocumented communities. I mean, undocumented. First, not first, but at the same time, we need to deal with the issues of path to citizenship. But many undocumented people get their health care in emergency rooms because we in this country, even in Trump's America, we mostly don't turn people away from emergency rooms. I mean, that there are rules. I'm not a doctor. I'm not in health care per se, but I mean, the job of any provider, a nurse, a doctor, a physical therapist, a nurse's assistant in an emergency room is to take care of somebody if they show up. And if we don't do this right, we continue to spend more. It's a lot more expensive to take care of somebody that if your little boy gets an ear infection and you're a young mother and you don't have insurance, or if you're undocumented, you don't take them in because you can't afford it, and then you wait till the pain is too great and you take them to the emergency room and it costs a lot more, and they might have hearing loss and all the inequalities and inequities we build in if we don't do this right. So it all has to, I mean, I don't know the answer exactly to your question, but it has to be, how do we make this work for our country, for our immigrants, for our citizens, for our non-citizens who are here, most of whom are working, as you know, working really hard. That's what some Americans don't understand about immigrants. And how do we make it work that way? But thank you.
Senator, I wanted to ask you, in listening to all of these questions, one of the things we hadn't had a chance to discuss is voting rights and how important it is, and knowing that, like I said, I am a parent of 3 daughters. My oldest is 19. She's a sophomore at University of Nevada, Reno. And so 2018 was the first time. She
went all the way up to
She went all the way up.
She didn't want to go to UNLV? No.
I actually wanted her to go to UNR. I wanted her to spread her wings just a little bit,
Make
but not too far.
independent.
Not too far, though. But 2018 was the first time she had an opportunity to vote. And because she is my child, she voted both in the primary and in the general.
Of course
you're going to do you're going to do municipal elections. You're going to do everything. And so she understands the importance of voting. There are so many folks who are disenchanted with voting, and also knowing that our voting rights have been chiseled away by the Supreme Court, and then the things that folks saw in Georgia in this last election. People are really frustrated, and so just wanted to get your thoughts and your opinions on, how do we go from where we were to moving forward, but then even making even more progress, and then hopefully inspiring people to understand how important it is to vote so that we can have some of these liberties that we're talking about here today.
If everybody had a mother like you, this would not be an issue anywhere. So.
We're going to record that. That part is all we need. And
send that kid in Reno. She hears that. All right. A couple things. First of all, the election in Georgia, I think, was stolen. Mm-hmm. I think I don't know Stacey well, I know her, but I think she won. I think the Secretary of State who carried out the elections, running against her, was running the state's elections and did everything they could. I mean, we have seen, I was Ohio Secretary of State many years ago, and what Republicans back then, they didn't want to expand voter registration as much as I did, but they weren't hostile to it. They didn't, some places in the South they still were, in some places, but they didn't suppress the vote so much. They didn't stand outside of polling places very often and try to dissuade people of color to vote, as they've had here. They didn't do these purges. They didn't do the change of laws. In fact, when I was Secretary of State, one thing we did, and I asked a lot of the state's businesses, what can we do to register more voters? And McDonald's Corporation printed up 1 million tray liners, the little piece of paper you put as a placemat on your tray. They were voter registration forms. We registered tens of thousands of voters. You could go to the Board of Elections in Akron, Ohio, and you would have seen voter registration forms with ketchup stains, but they were still voter registrations. And you know, I tell you that partly because it was kind of fun and it worked, and it meant the business community was involved too. But I tell you that too because Republicans weren't so hostile to voting rights as they are now. I mean, we know what happened in the South for years to people of color, and we know that's always happened to society some, but we have now a whole political party that's trying to suppress the vote. And that's why we organize, why we fight, that's why we need a better court system. But it all starts with voting rights, and it all starts with people like your daughter registering right away and voting and never missing a chance to vote and talking to her friends. And I've met so many activists in this state that really are ready to do that. And you have one of the most, I mean, the Nevada Democratic Party is the only party in this country, I think, that does voter registration year round. You're always knocking on doors doing that. And I wish we had more of it. But thank you for raising that.
Now, Senator,
Javier.
I wanted to get your opinion on unions. Specifically, what you feel we can do here on a local level in order to push forward for that $15 raise.
Did you say unions too? Did you say?
Yes.
Okay. First, a strong union movement. You know, as important as the minimum wage is, if you have a union like 226, like the culinary workers, they've left the minimum wage way in the distance, right? I mean, they still fight for it because unions, the thing about unions different from others often is they fight for people, they raise living standards for way more than just their members. Because they fight for, one of the things, I was at Culinary Workers Hall today, 226, and one of the things they're fighting for the most is expanded health insurance. They're particularly fighting for people with diabetes and people with asthma. And they know their workers are all covered. Everybody that carries that union card, 60,000 of them in Clark County, or at least in Nevada overall, 60,000 of them, they all have good insurance, but a lot of them have cousins and sisters and brothers and neighbors that don't. And that's what the union movement does. I mean, if we're successful in getting the minimum wage to $15 an hour, it's a big part because unions all over the country, and it's Teamsters and it's auto workers and it's SEIU and it's paper workers and all kinds of people have fought for it. But so much of it comes from the union movement. But and you know, we keep fighting that way.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks.
Being a millennial and a young voter, before I had my daughter, I had 4 jobs, all minimum wage in Los Angeles, just to make my ends meet. However, none of these jobs at the low-income positions that I worked offered paid vacation days, maternal or fraternal leave of absence, family leave, like if my mother was sick or my father was sick, you know, God forbid. None of those positions offered anything like that. So with the Fight for 15, are we going to push for paid family leave or maternal and fraternal leave like in some countries that they have?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a really good question. Most countries, rich countries like ours, where, you know, this country is perhaps the most wealthy in the world, and most countries that are wealthy have paid family leave, they have sick days, I'll tell you, this is all, you know this obviously well from what you said, that I was with a group I was in Cincinnati one day. It was a county labor dinner, and there were 6 or 7 women sitting at the front table, and round table, and half women of color, half white women, all women, and they had just signed their first union contract. They were custodians. They had signed their first union contract on behalf of 1,200 custodians with the downtown Cincinnati business owners. So these owners of these office buildings had janitors, and the janitors formed a union. And I sat down at the table and I said to a woman, I said, "What's it mean to have a union now?" And she looked at me, she said, "I'm 51 years old. First time in my life I have a paid 1-week vacation." That doesn't, unfortunately, unionization is important, as Javier recognizes it is, and you're nodding, you say it is, and you say it is. That is the best answer, but it's not a full answer because so many people in so many of these jobs aren't. I think the minimum wage, getting it to $15 is a big component of that. We ought to legislatively do child care tax credits, child tax credit overall. We ought to do family leave we've passed family leave that companies have to grant it, but they don't have to pay for it. That should be part of it. I mean, we need to offer all that to people, and it makes you a better worker. I mean, I know 226, and one of the things they said is that one of their slogans is one job should be enough. That people shouldn't have to. I mean, people shouldn't have to work 2 jobs. You work 40 hours, you work hard. It's another X number of hours to get to and from work, and you're struggling, and you shouldn't have to have a second job to take care of children. I mean, what are we saying to the next generation if we're not going to help with child care and your mom or dad's got to work 2 jobs or 3 jobs to support you, and what's that mean with taking care of them and nurturing them? And it just says we can do better than that as a country. Thanks for raising that. Your daughter's lucky to have you as a mother. I can tell. Oh, you did say she might be up later. She kind of took care of that tonight. Yeah. I think she finds the conversation so exciting that she can't stay awake during it.
She can't watch Ryan before review.
Senator, talking about living wages, Nevada right now, crazy fact, Nevada itself has more payday loan locations than McDonald's and Starbucks put together. And so what are your thoughts on payday loans? Another thing about them is, they're at around a 600% payback rate. So people often snowball into debt. What are your thoughts on that, and how would you ensure that folks don't fall into that?
Well, higher wages, the $15 an hour minimum wage is a big part of the answer. The overtime rule is a big part of the answer. Not allowing the payday loan companies to do what they're doing to fleece the country, to fleece the public. Think about those. You all read, and I don't think any of you said that you were subjected to this personally, but you read during the Trump shutdown that 800,000 federal workers were either furloughed or had to work without pay, right? And roughly half of them had to go to work. They're not getting paid. They got to pay their child care. They got to pay their transportation. Well, those 800,000 eventually got back pay. It happened within a week or two. So we mostly took care of them, but they still ran up debt. Some of them had to go to payday lenders. And then, like you say, if a payday loan costs whatever percent, almost everybody's got to go back a second time and a third time, and that's when you end up paying more in interest than your payday loan. But think about another group, and I don't mean to depress us, except that the other group of people who were federal contractors who prepare the food and do the cleaning of the facilities at the federal offices, the food service people, they're in the custodians and the security guards. They work not directly for the federal government. They work for contractors whom the federal government pays, and none of them got back pay. So they went 35 days without pay. And some of them are higher income people. That was wrong for them too, but a whole lot of them were making $10, $12, $15 an hour. And Trump didn't care. And we couldn't get McConnell and Trump to say, wait, I worked with a woman from Minnesota on a bill to do that, Senator Smith, to try to get, she and I were trying to get the government to pay these companies and then guarantee they paid the workers back pay. And that didn't happen. And then we've got a Payday, the new person Trump put at the Consumer Bureau, is weakening the consumer protections in payday lending. So I mean, that's why your daughter voting is so important, and why elections are so important. Is these so often the government come down, the Trump administration comes down on the side of these companies and never the workers. And how do you? And the payday lenders are some of the worst. And as you say, they're everywhere. And when you say there are more of them than there are McDonald's and Starbucks combined, they aren't in the affluent communities either. So they're really concentrated in low-income areas. And they really do prey on people who have to have the money. What is it, 40% of Americans can't come up with $400 to fix their car or for whatever emergency. And what do they do then? And I'm working on, some of you are eligible, some of you, I'm sure, get earned income tax credit. And one of the things one of the bills we're working on in tax reform is to allow anybody that gets earned income tax credit, that has earned it, can advance during the year $500. If your car breaks down, it's October, and you can't afford it to fix it without going to a payday lender, you could get $500 out of your earned income tax credit deducted from next year, but you could get an advance with no interest, and you could then take care of that. And we want to do some innovative things. That doesn't fix the big problem of wages and benefits and costs of health care, but it's a help to families that face that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So this will be our last question. So who will be our lucky last question?
All right, ready.
Yeah, so I guess, talking about how a lot of Americans don't have the $400 to fix their car. A lot of us are either uninsured or underinsured when we're in the same, I guess you could call it, precarious situation with our health care and with our benefits. So why not just support a Medicare for all Americans rather than make someone say, I'm 30 and I have a pre-existing condition, make me wait until I'm 55 to be able to buy into a Medicare program?
Thank you for that question. I would love to find a way to do universal coverage immediately. I want to help as many people as we can now. That's why, understanding you're 20 years away, that's why you expand Medicare to 50. But at the same time, you offer the public option so that people can come. You would have to pay something. We can't, government's not going to do this. I just can't imagine Congress passing. You may be eligible for Medicaid. You apparently aren't because you make too much money for Medicaid. Okay.
I actually lost my Medicaid benefits on the first because I got a better job that's only part-time, better hourly, but they don't offer me full-time hours.
So you don't.
Sorry.
So no.
I actually got diagnosed with my illness last year, and I'm doing really good. I'm almost in remission, and it was through Medicaid that I was able to get a lot of my care last year, and I was working right above minimum wage jobs and weren't quite that $15 an hour. I did qualify for Medicaid, even working almost full-time hours. I lost my benefits this year on the first because I did get a better job. It's only part-time though, so while the hourly is better, while my monthly is better because it's not full-time, I don't qualify for benefits. I don't.
Shouldn't you still qualify because you're making less money even though the hourly's higher?
You'd think. No. So I'm making more money. It's not as many hours. It's more hourly.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, but it's only 2 to 3 days a week. So my question is, it seems like a Medicare for All program would solve, like Chandra's sister's problem. It seems like it would solve access to care. It would definitely solve, people that are my age that have pre-existing conditions. It would solve prescription drug price costs as well. I remember I had to get one antibiotic with insurance before I got my diagnosis, and the pharmacy tech was blown away. He was like, let me check this again, because the cost of the drug, my insurance was so good at the time, the cost of the drug was so cheap. He said, even with good insurance, this should cost a couple $100s, but I've seen it cost thousands just for this one antibiotic that I needed at the time before I got my diagnosis. So, my question, I guess, is what are the disadvantages of supporting the Medicare for All program if there is that 4-year implementation with the option to buy into supplemental following that, and why not support it, I guess?
Well, the downside is Congress isn't going to do that. And I want to see us do what we can right now. And the public option can work by and large the same way. I just know that Mitch McConnell will not pass Medicare for All. I know that a number, I think we owe it. We should expand Medicaid so people like you are eligible. And I understand what you said, but I don't think that's not right. That you are, you're working harder, you're making more money, you're doing what we want. We want you to try to get a better job and get promoted, and then you get penalized. Just like the system. I was talking to somebody today at the Union Hall, at Culinary Hall, and he has a friend who is getting disability or getting Social Security disability. When the cost of living adjustment went up, he lost part of his food stamps. And I understand that. I understand government shouldn't pay for a certain thing, but I also understand that it's sort of a disincentive. It doesn't work right, and the law should be written. I'm not avoiding your question. I just don't know how. It's easy to say we should have Medicare for all. I don't know how you you get that through Congress, how you tell people that have insurance today, they're happy with it, we're going to cancel your insurance and put you in this Medicare plan, and then fund this Medicare plan as well as we need to. And I just don't trust Trump, and I don't trust McConnell to do that right. So I want Speaker Pelosi to immediately move on Medicare at 50 or Medicare at 55 and do the public option that would be available to you at any age that could compete with insurance and I think bring the price down. Thank you. Thanks for insisting.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I am a firm believer that this is what democracy looks like, an opportunity to ask the questions and be heard. And that's all people ever want, is to be heard and to be understood that their issues actually matter. So thank you so much, Senator, for visiting with us and being really open and honest with the questions and concerns that we have. And it was a really awesome conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for making it work, Nevada. All right. Thank you for the really good questions, all of you. Thanks. Thanks. Another